Hello, and welcome back to Safe Space. This is the show that's dedicated to people of color in the LGBTQIA plus community. I bring you a new guest every week so that they can share their journeys, and today is no different. Please help me in welcoming my guest today, DeAndre Gordon. What's up, DeAndre? How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for accepting the invitation. I'm so looking forward to having this conversation with you. So, in full disclosure, we had a brief conversation a couple weeks ago just to kind of get to know each other. But this is the first time we're actually sitting down to have this discussion. So if this is your first time here, typically what we do is we bring someone on to talk about their journey and to share their story in hopes that they can be a light to someone else. Because you never know who you're going to touch out in this world. And I hope that DeAndre sharing his story today allows someone to live their authentic life. What I'd like to do is to always go all the way back and start from the beginning and kind of figure out your origin story and let you share that. So at what age did you realize that you felt a little bit different? And even before that, how do you identify? How do you identify?
Yeah, so I identify as pansexual. Sometimes I use queer or bi, just depend on the audience, but it all kind of means the same to me. Like I like the wine, not necessarily the label. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, in terms of, when I thought it was a little bit different, I think I've always felt a little bit different. Like I come from a culture that it's a little bit better now, but at least when I was growing up, it was really quite like repressive. So, for example, if you were like artsy or like creative, that would be like associated with being gay, and even if it weren't necessarily like true, but I've always been artsy and creative, and some might even say like a little effeminate. So I sort of just like leaned into that at some point when I was younger, because folks, like you're either gonna like be yourself or not be yourself. I found it easier to be myself, and people seem to resonate with that a little bit more because I was like more authentic.
okay. So where are you from originally?
I'm from Montego Bay, Jamaica, Mobe. They're from there.
Okay. Okay, okay, another Jamaican. I love it. I mean, the people already know I was born in Jamaica, but I grew up in the States here. So you identify as a pansexual, and you realize at a young age. Talk about your experiences growing up in Jamaica, and how you navigated that space.
Yeah, so let's see. Growing up in Jamaica, how I navigated that space. I think I grew up in like a religious household. I would say like a lot of people on the island are really religious, and so like a lot of my upbringing was like shaped like in the church, like from like a biblical like perspective. But as I got older, I think like my relationship with faith, like I sort of strayed away from it. And now that I'm like in law school and I'm my own person, I've like my faith is deepened some more. Because I think how we were taught of, it was sort of like, like if you're anything but straight, then it's like a sin against God, and that can't possibly be right. But now as I'm older and I've reframed that, I think, like, God exists in all of us, whether we're queer or not queer. And like really it's about like developing like a relationship with love. So if there's anything I want anyone to get from this, is that like they are loved, even if they don't feel like it. They have people who support them, and just because they don't identify with like societal norms necessarily doesn't mean that they don't have like anything to offer. So I've been fortunate enough, like I didn't actually come out until I moved to the US. I was like 18 when I came out. I'm 25 now. Um, but while I was in Jamaica, like there were definitely like whispers of folks being like, he's never like really been with women before, even though I have been with women and I do like women, but it's like, oh, he's never really been with women before. Does that mean he's gay? And so it's like never really confirming it or denying it because of like, like putting yourself out there could put a target on your back. So I didn't want that for myself, and my family certain didn't.
That's awesome. So, you didn't really come out until you were after you left Jamaica and you were 18. But let me ask you this: while you were in Jamaica, even though you didn't really come out, or say anything. Like I know that space can be very hard to navigate, especially when you're dealing with feelings that you're not familiar with, going through puberty and things of that sort. How did you manage that, and or how did you hide it or not deal with it?
How did I do it? I think most of my friends are women, and I think generally speaking, at least in my experience, like my female counterparts have been much more like gentler, more like accepting than my male counterparts, because there's sort of like this like aggro like male like tendency in terms of like sports, for example. Like I never did sports. I chose to do things like home ec instead. So like I just remember like I went to Herbert Mars and I was one of two guys in my home ec class, and everyone thought that was weird because they were like, why aren't they in industrial arts? What's going on with that? But I knew I wouldn't like industrial arts, and I knew that I didn't want to be around a bunch of guys who had an interest in something that I clearly didn't. So in that way, I think I just like I sort of like created like my own path. It wasn't necessarily easy because I always had to deal with like whispers, people questioning my ability, like questioning even that's the whole idea of like, you want to have kids, are you gonna have kids, which is just like not something you really think about when you're younger, but people sort of like cast it on you.
Yeah, they kind of imprint that in on you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I just think like, things like heteronormative like culture, like I've been like influenced in that way as well. And so like I internalized like a lot of things. So I was like, something's wrong with me. Like, why can't, like I be like other people? Like, why don't I like the same things other guys like? Why can't I even talk about it? Because, when I was younger, I didn't really have the words or like the language to like describe what I was feeling. And even if I did, there weren't very many people I felt comfortable being like direct with about exactly what it is, because some folks who present as allies, they may not necessarily be allies. So just kind of towing that fine line, I suppose.
I totally get that, and I understand. All right, so let's move on to you're 18. You've now left Jamaica. Let me ask you this: why did you decide to leave Jamaica? Was it because of what was going on with you, or just for a change of pace?
It was largely a change of pace. Fortunately, I didn't have to leave Jamaica because of my sexuality. I know many people had to. Unfortunately, it's like it was a safety thing for them. But in my case, my parents just thought I'd have more opportunities in the US, which I have. Like, I'm really grateful for that. I think in the short time I've been in the US, I've done a lot more than I could have in Jamaica. So currently, like I serve on a number of different committees advocating for like LGBTQ rights. That's something I really enjoy because ultimately I want to be able to have people be as comfortable as possible in their skin and feel like they're contributing in some way.
Hmm.
In terms of how I came out, it was on social media. It wasn't even like a coming out post per se. I just posted a picture of my boyfriend. It was his birthday, and then everyone was sort of like, "What's going on? Who's this guy? Like, are you gay? Are you not gay?" So it sort of created like a firestorm for like a brief period. But I felt like I had to do it like at that point, like because given all the work I've done, like in public policy and direct services, like I'm always telling people they should be themselves and be authentic. But I wasn't doing that myself. And so once I started doing that, it became a lot easier to convey that message to other people.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I understand that completely. I've done the same thing as well, and that's it's led me to doing this platform. I truly believe that you can help someone by telling your story. There's someone out there that will look up to you and see themselves in you. Now, you said you came out publicly via social media, just posting a picture of you and your boyfriend at the time. Um, how
Right.
did your parents and your family and your friends react? Because, all right, once you put this picture up of this other gentleman, they automatically are going to assume that you're gay, but you clearly do not
Right.
identify as gay. So, like, what is that conversation like? It's one thing to say, "Hey, I'm gay," but then to say I'm pansexual, a lot of people don't fully understand what that means to be pansexual. So, kind of explain how you maneuver through that space.
Yeah, so it's sort of like an evolution for me. So I know my mom is an incredibly supportive. It was difficult at first, I think, with many parents, it sort of feels like they lose like a version of like their child that they knew, and like you become a new person. It's hard to like grapple with. So we did struggle with that, I will admit, but we're in a really good place now, and I'm happy about that. I'm fortunate that I have supportive parents. I first initially, like the default, like in Jamaica, is like, oh, you're gay. And there's no conversation past that, even if you like women. And so it's sort of like, that's how it kind of started for me. I was like, okay, like I'm bi. But people still didn't really understand that because they're just like, well, you're not really bi. Like, you're just like a gay. And so then from there, I was like, I'm queer because it felt more like inclusive, more like expansive. And it was also like one way to like reclaim like language that has been like historically used to like harm like the community. And now I'm just say I'm pan. And I earlier mentioned like it's like a reference I borrowed from Schitt's Creek, one of my favorite shows. Like I like the wine, not necessarily the label. So it's like it's more about the person than like what they identify as. So,
Okay. One of my favorite shows, Schitt's Creek. Love that show. So I get the reference. Um, Explain for those that do not know what pansexual is. Explain it, and then how you identify in that realm of pansexual.
yeah, so I think there are different ways to like define pansexual. I mean, like the Google definition is just like you're sexual romantically attracted to people regardless of their sex or gender. So that's it in like the most general sense. And as far as like being bi, which I think is part of it, like if you like more closely align with like binaries like male female, then that's probably like a label you're more comfortable using. But I don't necessarily believe in binaries. I think people show up in lots of different ways across the spectrum, and so like for me, pan is just the easiest term to use, because
Yeah.
in terms of like who I spend my life with, that could be anyone. So,
So now that you've come out as pansexual, for you, is it more about the energy that people give that you're attracted to, physical appearance?
yeah, it's more about the energy, but I would be lying if I say like I think many people, including myself, the first thing you're attracted to is like a physical appearance, and then you go from there. So like I tend to put more emphasis on like the energy I get from people, but initially it's like the physical appearance. Like I might see someone and be like, oh, they're really attractive, like I like that person, and then you start talking to them and seeing like if you have interests in common and like where those interests are, and then that ultimately like deepens like the connection, because I'm all about connecting with people. I think that especially like post COVID, we're still like COVID is like still around, but like we don't really talk about it anymore. But I think people really struggle to connect and like have like authentic like connections that don't center on like work or like what does someone do with their life, and just like really trying to deepen that. So that's something I try to do my best at, because I think everybody needs that.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that statement. So, what you talked about that you are involved in the community, and what exactly are you involved in? Like, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. So when I moved to the US, I my entry point to the United States was Minnesota. And so that was a really, really big culture shock for me, because as you know, you come from Jamaica, like even though we're not like a homogenous culture, most people look the same, like in terms of like skin color, like features, um, shared beliefs, things like that. So when I moved to Minnesota, I moved to like a largely like indigenous community, but all the power structures are white. Um, that didn't sit well with me at all, because I'm someone who's always like trying to like push against the grain, like trying to find ways to get more people involved. And so my first advocacy experiences were actually with what's Minnesota Youth Council. They're still around, so that's like a shameless plug for the Minnesota Youth Council. And in that role, I was a youth representative to Congressional District 7. So we advise the governor and all the branches of government like in Minnesota, primarily on like youth issues. So like education, like my area of expertise was the school to prison nexus. because that's a huge problem here in the U.S. Even in Jamaica too. I think people being funneled into the legal system for the class or other reasons. Um, and so that was really great. So through that, I was able to work on a number of bills that have now become law. And then from there, I joined my local like commission, the Bemidji Youth Advisory Commission, because that's where I lived. And I also focused on similar issues there, but they were more in like the local level. And then once I started college, I joined a PAC, a political action committee called Outfront. And that's the largest like political action committee for LGBTQ folks in Minnesota. And we largely focus on electing LGBTQ candidates, which I think is great because there's not enough representation there. This last election cycle, Minnesota had the largest LGBTQ class of any class in history at the Capitol, which is great news for the community. Um, and I'm currently in New York. That's where I live now, and I am on the LGBTQ bar. We just had our gala yesterday. It was really fun. Met a lot of people. It's not very often you get to meet like queer attorneys or like other like professionals because they are around, but some choose to stay in the closet for professional reasons. Some are out, and some are like in between. So it's really nice when you can come together in the same space and like tackle the same issues and like share community with each other. So that's sort of where I'm at. It's sort of like a mouthful, but I think it's just been like an arc in terms of like my journey in advocacy.
Wow, that is a mouthful, and I want to dive in a little bit deeper on some of those topics. So, I when I was doing a little research on you, I noticed that you were in law school, or have you graduated from law school yet?
I have not. I will be graduating next May. Um, Technically, I'll be done with my law school credits in December, but I'm staying on until May because I'm also in a joint degree program. So I'll graduate with a Master of Arts in International Relations and the JD. And then within next year, I'll pass the bar and I'll have a Esquire behind my name. So
Well, I'm looking forward to that. We need more people like you out there. Now, last season, I had someone on, Joelle. She is a transgender woman who is very big in community and political advocacy. And it seems like you are right in line with her. It's amazing to see people, queer people, doing the things that you're doing because we need people to be out there on the forefront doing these things for the community. What do you have any political aspirations later on down the road?
I do. I do. I'm not sure what yet. I know my experience thus far has largely been working behind the scenes, which I really enjoy because I think because of the American political system and how it's set up, I'm a huge believer in that. Because of the structure, you get a lot more done behind the scenes. Like I like to think of myself as like a quiet leader, for lack of better words. In terms of political aspirations, I'm not sure. Like I could, like I think in terms of like my perspective in politics, I really believe in having like local impact with a global perspective, which is part of the reason why I am pursuing a Master of Arts in International Relations. So moving from Jamaica to the US, I was able to compare and contrast a lot of systems. And I think they're very like similar in terms of like how oppression like manifests itself in terms of like education, like class, income, things like that. And I think politically, like that's one way to address those issues. But you have to do that in combination with like grassroots because there are structures and rules often that were written not for us or any marginalized community. And so if you don't know what those rules are, you're not able to effectively like navigate those systems. So even though
Yeah.
I may be somewhat jaded, I still really do believe in the power of political advocacy. But I also want to like really encourage people if like politics is not their place, there are other ways to influence change, whether that's through the arts, whether that's through protesting. Sometimes simply just showing up can be like enough because there's power in numbers and that can put pressure on relevant people to make the changes that are necessary.
Absolutely. So this is not somewhere where I typically go with on this show, but you seem to have your foot to the ground when it comes to politics, and I kind of want to touch on that a little bit because the political climate that we're in is extremely volatile. What are your thoughts on what's going on in the United States right now? I mean, it's a global thing, but I really just kind of want to focus a little bit on what's going on in the U.S. What are your viewpoints, and how do you think that you can help to contribute to this political climate that we're in right now?
Well, I believe in the politics of love. Honestly, I think like, and then I think that to some degree, like, stems from like my upbringing, like in the church. Like, you really want to approach problems from a place of love. I see confrontation as an opportunity to build relationships, and the starting point for me is always just listening to what someone else, because people want to be heard, they want to be listened to, even if you don't agree with them. But if you start out the gate by disagreeing with them, you're not going to really get anywhere. So, in terms of my thoughts, in terms of what's happening in the U.S. politically, there's a lot happening, like on the electoral level, on like the global level. We're seeing like colleges across the U.S. are handling like protests differently. How people can contribute to that, I think, is just, again, to just keep showing up. I am a huge believer in the power of the pen. So you can write letters to your editor, you can publish articles, try to make them as accessible as possible. So like whenever I try to write anything, I try my best to keep it at an eighth grade level or below, so it reaches the broadest audience. So that's one thing to think about. Um, Music is a good way to do that too. If you're a creative and you make songs, that's one way to go. And even dance. I know, like, my ancestors, those are things that they use, like, in terms of like to lead to like the abolition of slavery. So like, I draw a lot of parallels between like the institution of slavery and like the residual effects of that we're still feeling like today, going from things like redlining, like lack of quality healthcare for LGBTQ folks, even around like adoption laws and like foster care laws. Like, we know that LGBTQ folks that are in the foster care system, once they age out, many of them become like homeless. They don't get adequate access to resources to continue um, the path that they were on. So essentially, they like lose that safety net they had before, even if it wasn't necessarily like the best safety net, but at least they had one. So there's that.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I want to step away from the politics a little bit now and kind of go back and just kind of talk about you personally, because as I've kind of gone through your social media feed, I noticed that you seem to be very adventurous and you love to be outdoors and have fun and show up in that way. Give us a little bit of insight about who you are, your backstory, and how you spend your time with your loved ones.
hmm How I spend my time with my loved ones. You are right. I love the outdoors. I think it's one of the best ways to recharge. So I love kayaking. I don't know how to swim, but it's on my list. Like, I want to learn how to swim before I turn 30. Because I do like being in the water. Like, growing up in Jamaica, one of my favorite things to do with my family was going to the beach on weekends. Like, we'd like walk to the beach because we weren't terribly far from it, and that was nice. Many of those beaches now aren't what they used to be because they're like privatized now or like owned by resorts, unfortunately. But that was a really good pastime for us. So that stuck with me. Like, I feel close to the water. So wherever the water is, like, that's where I want to be. um,
I
Other
think
things
I think you're talking about. Go ahead. Go ahead.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, when you said that about the beaches being privatized, it made me think of Doctor's Cave, and I'm thinking that's probably one of the beaches you're talking about.
One of them, yes, indeed it is. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
so I do like that. I really enjoy like movies and like films. So like whenever there's an opportunity to like go see a film, like, and like discuss it and talk about it, that's something I could do. I like to read a lot. I don't do it so much anymore because when you're in law school, all you read are case books and statutes and laws. So I try to like supplement that with like fun reading whenever I can, because otherwise you kind of lose the joy of reading. And I don't know, I just like to go out. I like to like go and experience new things. I'm kind of like a thrill seeker, so things like skydiving interest me, or like things that give me like a real like rush of dopamine. So I don't know. Those are all
Okay,
things like my friends. So, oh, and
that's awesome.
I'm a huge foodie. I think food can you can tell a lot about a culture, about a people based on what they eat. And to me, food is like a really great way to like bring people together and just like break bread and just have a good time. So
I'm there for it. I am there for it. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into your experiences being pansexual. You know, I identify as a bisexual man. I dated lots of women, and then I'm married. You know, to my husband. Everyone that watches this, it's a regular watcher, knows that I've talked about it. You know, I've spoken with other people in the LGBTQIA plus community, and I just always find it fascinating how people show up and how they identify and what it really means to them. So, you know, you being pansexual and really just being around vibing on energy, you know, when you come across someone, like, how do you determine who you want to spend your time with and how you show up? And then also, you know, are you out publicly with the people that you're with, that you're invested in, that you're sharing your time and your space with? Or are you more of a, I don't want to say recluse, but you more private when it comes to that?
I think I'm a little bit of both. Like I'm like out like publicly. Like if someone like asks me like about my partner and stuff, I'll tell them. Like we're in like an open relationship, so like they're like definitely like a boundaries that we set for ourselves around that, because every couple is different. But I would say I'm open. I have like no interest in going back in the closet, or like I know like in terms of like professionally that can be a struggle sometimes, because the workplaces still many workplaces still aren't as open, or like ones that are progressive, they aren't as progressive internally. And so that can be like a balancing act. So that's why whenever I'm even thinking about like where I want to work professionally, or like what sort of events I want to go to, those are things I consider, like what kind of resources are you providing for like your LGBTQ like staff or like workers. And some of those things could be, for example, like family planning as part of like the benefits package. Other things could be like, like IVF treatment for families who want to have children someday, but they don't want to go about it like a conventional way. Um, with my partner, like, like I have pictures of him like on social media. People know who he is. My friends certainly know who he is. My parents know who he is. They've met him. Yeah.
Okay. So I have two questions, and it's two part, and it kind of like a little bit separate. But so you talked about your parents knowing. How are your mother and your father? How do they deal with it, and what's that relationship like? And then also, you said you had lived in Minnesota first, and now you're currently living in New York. What is
Mhm.
the atmosphere in those spaces? Do you feel safe in the environment in which you live?
I definitely feel safer in New York, but New York in some ways is sort of like a queer like mecca. Like I think New York is the best city in the world. Like there are definitely things I think you can do here you can't do anywhere else. It's like the appeal, the aesthetic of it. Minnesota is a pretty vibrant LGBTQ community as well, but I think it's largely informed by like those Midwestern like values. So like New Yorkers are much more like out there, much more willing to like take risk and be open. And in my view, Minnesotans aren't as like open to like taking those like big risks, and they're more family oriented. And when I say family oriented, I mean it in the sense that like you could grow up with people in that town that you live in, and like they follow you all throughout your life. Whereas in New York, it's the opposite. People are like touch and go. So it's like if you're having, yep. Yeah, so New York, I love New York. I think it's like the best city in the world. There's like so much you can do here that I personally feel you can't really find anywhere else. A difference between like being queer in New York, in my view, and being queer in Minnesota is like in New York, just like the pace of things moving very quickly, people can be like really touch and go. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to like form those connections and like deepen them unless you see each other every day, which could be like in a workplace setting or if you go to school together and then you can form those like friendship bonds. Whereas in Minnesota, I think queer culture is largely informed by Midwestern values. So people are a little bit more laid back. You might go to school with someone like as a child all the way up to when you're an adult, and then like that's your crew, that's your people. So people tend to stick together, and they may not be as willing to like let other people in. Whereas in New York, people let you in the group, but there's no real guarantee that that group is gonna like stay together. So it's like you're having an experience now, and this is what the experience is. And in Minnesota, it's like you can have that experience and have some level of security knowing that like you're gonna see that person again and deepen the bond the next time you see them.
Okay. Let me ask. Well, hold on. What would you say to your 10-year-old self,
My 10-year-old
knowing what
self,
you, yeah, knowing what you know now?
what would I know now? I think I would say to myself that it's super simple and cheesy and cliche, but I think I would tell myself not to worry. It's gonna be okay. Cause like I think my default is to worry. Like my nervous system is like constantly activated. So like that can, like take away from certain experiences I'm having because I'm like not feeling as present. But I would just say not to worry. Everything's gonna be okay. Everything's happening the way it should happen, and just to be try to be the best version of myself as I can be, and also just to be kind. Like kindness goes a long way, not just for myself, but for other people. Because I think everybody's going through something, and you never know what that thing is. So if you can make it a little easier for them, just be kind.
Absolutely. I think patience goes a long way. Patience goes a long way. Let me ask, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we start to wrap this up?
I'm not sure. Like, I feel like there's a lot I have to say, but I'm not really sure where I want to go with this. So, like, if you want to ask me more questions, you can. Like, definitely.
Well, no. Well, listen. If there's something specific you want to just kind of touch on, the floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Yeah. See, what do I want to touch on? I think is important. I, I think just because I'm sort of going through like a transition now in terms of like I'm still in graduate school, but pretty soon we'll be starting a career. Like I've kind of technically already started my career by being in law school. I think what I would tell people is that if you are part of the community, to not shortchange yourself with certain opportunities. Because, and I'm talking about that from like an intersectional perspective. So, for example, my partner is white. His experiences as a gay man are going to be very different from me as like a black pansexual man. And so in that way, like whatever you're doing, just really think about like how those identities intersect, in the spaces you are, and also like how you can show up in the ways that are most supportive depending on the spaces you are in. Because that's something I'm constantly navigating and trying to learn. It's like, when do I speak up? When do I listen? Because I think when you're part of a community, sometimes you want to be like the face and you want to be like out there and constantly like advocating. But as part of that, also just like take care of yourself and
Yeah.
recognize that like
Yeah.
break, relaxing is also revolutionary.
Yes. Absolutely. Okay. So my last question to you is, what words of wisdom would you want to impart on the people that are watching you here today?
Words of wisdom. Okay, let's see. Words of wisdom. I think probably the biggest thing I can say, and it's easier said than done, is to try to be yourself. Like, if you're someone who's colorful and you like bright colors, for example, this is like a super simple example, wear bright colors because that's who you are. The right people will navigate towards you because I think we try to mold ourselves sometimes into fitting into certain spaces, but those spaces were not necessarily designed to like accommodate like our needs and our wants. And so when we're in those spaces, even if we are successful, it doesn't quite feel right. So in that way, you can create your own space for other people and yourself, and also just to show up in the ways that you think would be most healthy for you and for your friends, for your family, and recognize that everybody's journey is different. So
Absolutely.
it's good.
Absolutely. Well, DeAndre, this has been such an amazing, insightful conversation with you. I thank you so much for your time, for sharing your journey, your story. I wish you nothing but continued success in all of your endeavors. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on TV as a political advocate. And I love the fact that you're in community. I've come across quite a few people that are actually really big community advocates and big in politics. And like I said, I look forward to seeing what you do. So the best of luck in everything. And thank you again for accepting the invitation to come on here and speak with our viewers today. I'm hoping that your story touches someone and gives someone the courage to be their authentic self. With that being said, thank you everyone for joining us this week. As I always say, take care of yourself, be kind to others, and maintain a safe space. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for watching this show on Indecent Media. Now, if you're watching here on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and hit the notification button so that you can get notified when we drop new videos every week. See you guys next time.